into week 2. We have the whole gang here. Snap, crackle, and pop in the house. It is George Kerth, your host, along with Cody Roadcap. Cody, what's up?
Not much, George. Doing good, but hoping that this show is a little bit more exciting than that boring serial you just referenced us to.
Dude, I mean, it's
Whoa.
it's a 3, and you're just going to go out there and, okay, whatever. And Tyler Snyder. Tyler, what's up? Do you like being pop over there?
Hey, you know what? Rice Krispies might be a boring cereal. However, you add a little bit of marshmallow to those, you get some Rice Krispie treats, and suddenly it is amazing. And that's what this podcast is. This podcast is the marshmallow that holds us all together.
See, now that's the kind of mindset we need for this podcast, Cody. Take some notes.
I don't need to take notes from Tyler. Not at all. But I did love the analogy.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you.
We'll take the small victories from Cody, but you guys aren't here to talk about cereal and Rice Krispie treats, so why don't we jump into some NFL news?
Well, I think one of the biggest news of the week, and it's not even because it's one of the biggest players or even one of the biggest injuries, but it's because it's a podcast favorite, and that is Ryan Fitzpatrick is down with a hip injury. He's expected to hit the IR, miss about 6 to 8 weeks, I believe I heard. Taylor Heineke is going to slot in and start. Now, I know at the end of last season, when we were watching that playoff game, we were saying Taylor Heineke, maybe he's the guy. Maybe he needs to be the starter. Uh, how confident do you guys feel in Heineke now moving forward with Ryan Fitzpatrick down?
It's a wait and see for me. I'm not going to lie. He looked good in the playoff game, but I think some of that could have been, hey, we've never seen this guy before. I know Antonio Gibson is a little banged up after week 1, not expected to miss time, but he's a little banged up. Curtis Samuel, he went on the IR right before week 1. You know, we thought this offense had a lot of weapons, a lot of pieces around it. Now with Taylor Heineke, he's down Samuel, possibly down Gibson with not up to full speed. It's going to be a tough one. I mean, their defense is still good. They're going to be in pretty much every game they play. But Tyler Heineke, not a guy I'm rushing out to grab on waivers. And I think it also hits or hurts how you evaluate like guys like Terry McLaurin.
You got his name right like 3 times, and then you still go back to calling him Tyler. I feel like every single time we mention him, you call him Tyler at least one time.
It's a
But
good name.
Close
We're just supposed
enough.
to stick with it.
yeah. um, really, it worries me a little bit about some of the weapons you might have in fantasy. I think Logan Thomas is going to be fine, especially because you're not expecting much out of tight ends. But Terry McLaurin, you're still going to play him. He might not have as many boom weeks, but you might have to pump the brakes just a little bit until we see more about Taylor Heineke. I'm with Cody. It's a wait and see. But I like the dude. I hope he works out, and hopefully we get Ryan Fitzpatrick back sooner rather than later.
In other NFL news, we did lose Raheem Mostert to an injury as well. He's going to be out for about 8 weeks. But guys, we just have to break down a little bit of this San Francisco 49ers backfield, because I know it's always a mess. I know there's always a bunch of running backs in there, and you kind of got to figure out which one's going to be the starter. Now, Mostert was one of the guys we liked coming in, but he's hurt now. And Trey Sermon was another guy that we liked. He was drafted pretty highly in drafts by a lot of people, and he was inactive this week, not because of injury, but because head coach Harbaugh said that he just didn't view Trey Sermon as one of the top 3 running backs. He viewed him as the number 4. So because of that, he was inactive, didn't play. We saw a lot of Elijah Mitchell. We saw some Jermichael Hasty. And now with Mostert down, you have to assume that suddenly Trey Sermon does become one of the top 3 backs, and he will play. So fantasy-wise, guys, which one of these 3 do you want to move forward with?
Now, I kind of want to say Trey Sermon because I know people spent draft capital on him, but we know this backfield likes to go with the hot hand. That's how, like, Jermichael Hasty is even a name that people would actually know. And any other team, I feel like you wouldn't even know who we're talking about. But it's got to be Elijah Mitchell. He is the person that stepped in first off the bench, really, and he's the person that put up a lot of fantasy points in week 1. That doesn't go unanswered by the 49ers coaching staff. So he's going to be the guy for the foreseeable future in my eyes until he either gets hurt like every other San Francisco running back or just has a complete dud.
Yeah, I'm with you on Elijah Mitchell there. He was a guy I liked coming out of college, Louisiana, a raging Cajun. He went in the 6th round. He went a few rounds later than Trey Sermon, but he apparently surpassed him on the depth chart. And I can't remember if it was Adam Schefter or Jay Glazer on the pregame show even said Elijah Mitchell is the guy you need to know in San Francisco, and that was before the Mostert injury. So apparently there's a lot of buzz around executives that those guys are talking to on how much they like this guy. He can be a 3-down back for them, has great hands out of the backfield. Definitely a guy I'm going to look for. JaMychal Hasty's probably going to steal a game or two where he gets the hot hand. But until Mostert gets back and until Sermon gets on the field, roll with Elijah Mitchell, and he should be the number one waiver pickup. So if you did lose this week, the silver lining is you're getting Elijah Mitchell. Unless you play in Fab, then you gotta pay up.
Let me just also throw in really quick before draw back to Tyler here. If anyone drops Raheem Mostert in your leagues, I still think when he gets back, he's the first guy to get a shot at carries. He's worth an ad. If you see him on the waiver wire at any point, especially if you have a reserve spot, throw him on reserve. He shouldn't be sitting on waivers.
And look, if you spend draft capital on Raheem Mostert, I'm sure you're pretty upset they're going to be missing him for 8 weeks. But if you were an owner of Jerry Judy and spent draft capital on him, if you saw the injury happen, you probably thought he's done for the year. I know I did. I texted our group chat that we have of us three, and I immediately said Jerry Judy's season is over because his ankle went sideways and it looked bad, and he ended up getting carded, and I thought he was done. But then it came out that he actually only had a high ankle sprain, which I know I say only. Trust me, I've had it. It's very, very painful. But he's only expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks, so he should be back. In that time, you can expect some Tim Patrick, some KJ Hamler, some Cortland Sutton, maybe even more Noah Fant. But guys, what do you think about this Jerry Judy injury? How much does it hurt your fantasy team if you have him?
Tough blow. I mean, like you said, it was an injury that looked way worse than it ended up being. I'm glad that he'll be back at some point this season. We know Sutton is still going through a few things coming back from his ACL injury last year. So, like you mentioned, Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler are some names to keep an eye on. KJ Hamler dropped a deep shot that would have had him a huge week this week. We'll have to wait and see there. And I know we're going to talk about it a little bit more in the show, so I won't spoil the middle of it. You got to wait and see, or wait and listen, I guess, because we're a podcast.
You can still watch us on YouTube. A little bit of a shameless plug right there as well. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it more later, but Jerry Judy is a big blow, and he really actually did emerge as the number one wide receiver in that offense in the last few weeks of the preseason. So it hurts, but Teddy Bridgewater has been spreading the ball out regardless. So we're gonna just have to see which of those weapons kind of explodes as the number 1/2 now, depending on how long it takes Sutton to get a full workload out there.
Yeah, guys, and you know what? Injuries happen every week. They're going to keep happening. To all our listeners out there who are curious about, your guys that you saw get injured in the game that are questionable, just keep following our podcast. We will update who's going to be active, inactive every week, all season long. So just keep an eye on the podcast, and we'll let you know. But injuries aren't the only thing worth noting here. The one thing that I noticed, and it's very interesting, is Pittsburgh Steelers rookie running back Najee Harris. He was drafted very highly this year. He actually played every single offensive snap, did not come off the field. However, despite being on the field that much, he only accumulated 5.4 points in a half-point PPR league. Do you think that's concerning that he's not putting up that many points for the amount of time he's on, or are you just more excited because he's getting used more?
Let me just say, I'm going to compare him with Clyde Edwards-Helaire from last year. Clyde Edwards-Helaire came out after being hyped as a first-round pick, put up his best game of the season in week 1, and it was just downhill from there. I'd almost rather you see a 5.4 point game, see him get the growing pains kind of out of the way early, and then he can hopefully come up and be a better back as the season goes on. I still don't have much of a fear, especially seeing that he's going to get the workload playing every single snap. But you might want to temper your expectations on Najee Harris for the next few weeks until he really gets the wheels rolling.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Temper your expectations. I know we drafted him end of round 2, beginning of round 3, depending how late in the offseason you drafted. But like George said, he played every snap. He did have 16 carries. Granted, it was only for 45 yards, so not a great yards per carry, but he had 16 carries. We talk all the time about how we don't like running backs by committees. That's not a committee. 16 carries is a great amount for a running back. You get that many opportunities, eventually you're going to break through for a big run. And don't discount how good the Bills are. The Bills were a few plays away from being in the Super Bowl last year. The Steelers defense is good, and so is the Bills defense. Don't discredit them at all. I think Najee Harris will be fine long term, and with that volume, you have to keep playing him. I don't think you're rushing him to your bench. You drafted him to play him. He stays in your starting lineup on volume alone.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you don't like running back by committees. Nobody does. Nobody here does even. But I thought it was very interesting that there was some running back by committees out there that didn't play out the way that I really expected it to. We'll get into them a little bit more later on some certain guys, especially on waivers. But you have the Texans. We thought Philip Lindsay was going to be the guy, but it was Mark Ingram. We have the Cardinals. I thought Chase Edmonds was going to be the guy, but James Conner got more carries. Even the Bucks on Thursday night, you thought Ronald Jones was going to be the starter and playoff Lenny was going to slot in there a little bit, but it was all Leonard Fournette all game, especially after Ronald Jones fumbles. So some of these running back by committees are playing out a little bit differently than we expected. We got to remember it is only week one. Teams don't want to show you everything they got on the table in week one. Things can change for week two, but they are definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward. But guys, why don't we just go ahead and move on to our next segment, which just so happens to be George's favorite segment, which is the quotes of the week.
I'm actually there. We got one here for this week. We'll see if we have another one to throw into another show here. But Cody, you're the one that found this. Why don't you actually take it?
Yeah, so I know George just wants to talk about it because of the player it's referencing, but
You're right.
49ers wide receiver Brandon Ayuk, he was being drafted higher than Deebo Samuel, which when we talked about early in the offseason, we said you should target Deebo Samuel over Brandon Ayuk because of value. And it came out today that the beat reporters around San Fran is saying Ayuk is still learning on how to be a pro. He had 0 targets, 0 catches, 0 everything, 0 points in fantasy this past week. It seems like there's definitely something going on there, whether it's work ethic related, whether it's showing up on time related. We don't know those answers, and I'm not trying to speculate on what we think it is for Brandon Ayuk, but there is definitely something going on. He seems to have dropped a few rungs down in Kyle Shanahan's pecking order. There's wide receivers ahead of him. Even old guys like Mohamed Sanu is getting more playing time. So Brandon Ayuk is an early season candidate for bust potential, but it's a long season. Like Aaron Rodgers said, there's 16 games left. It's a long season. So maybe he'll be able to turn it around.
It's important to note that he technically wasn't even running with the starters. He was rotating in and out. He was expected to be the wide receiver 1/wide receiver 2 with Deebo Samuel. So it's not even like he just didn't get targeted and was on the field. He was benched, essentially. It's crazy.
One more quick thing here before we move on to the heart of the show. I did see a report at the beginning of the season how Brandon Ayuk was going to be Devontae Adams. And I love how we compare guys to future Hall of Famers, All-Stars. I'm not sure Devontae Adams is actually going to get into the Hall of Fame. So that's why I stumbled there. But you remember, Devontae Adams had a pretty bad sophomore year after a strong end to his rookie year. So if he is going to be Devontae Adams, maybe this isn't the year for Brandon Ayuk, but starting next year, go all in. Just a thought.
The return of Drop Vontae Adams. I remember that year. But guys, why don't we
paired up with Jamalfa Williams pretty good.
Before we make fun of any more Packers, I think the Packers fans got plenty of bad blood.
We got laughed at enough. It's okay.
We can move on from making fun of the Packers. Why don't we go ahead and move on to the week 2 waiver wires? So guys, obviously a big part of fantasy is the waiver wire. If you struggled in week 1 or if you had some injuries in week 1, you can still help your team out by going out there and getting a good free agent ad. And week 1 is really the best time to get the waivers because it's when the guys you didn't expect break out. And there's plenty of them this week. And, I've said it for years. If you're going to lose a week in fantasy, lose week 1 because then you have the best waiver. You get that top guy. You can make a run all season long. So if you did lose this week, don't stress out yet. Now, we did have an article posted earlier yesterday by George. It was of some of the guys that you should be targeting on the waiver wire. We can go over those quickly, but that is for anybody that is checking out our website. We wanted to give a little extra content to those who are willing to take the time to listen to the podcast. We love you guys. So, George, do you want to hit up some of your waiver wires on the website real quick, and then we will jump into some of our extras?
Sure, I'll just do some quick hit here. So we got New Orleans quarterback Jameis Winston put up a good week 1. Former top 10 quarterback, could be someone that could help your fantasy team. We already talked a little bit about Elijah Mitchell, running back from San Francisco. Seems to be leading that committee, the hot hand approach. We talked about 2 Houston running backs pretty heavy in the offseason, and one of them was not Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram led Houston in carries this week, so he's someone you should take a look at. Gadget running back wide receiver Cordarrelle Patterson for Atlanta was playing wide receiver and backup running back, so just the opportunity for him means he's worth a speculative ad. He was the wide receiver 2 for Arizona this week, and he's a big play threat, so that's somebody you could watch for. And Nelson Aguilar, who's now in New England, put up a good year last year, and I think he's officially put the Philly media storm behind him. So somebody you could watch for there in New England. And finally, I have Dalton Schultz on there as well if anyone's looking for a tight end. That's just a volume ad. You're looking for volume in tight ends, so we'll see what happens with him in the next few weeks as well.
Absolutely, George. If you guys want any more information on those guys or a little bit more of a deep dive, feel free to check out the website and read that article by George. It was well written. But guys, let's go ahead and jump into our waivers. One guy that we don't have listed that we weren't going to mention is Juwan James, the tight end for the Saints. He had a big day with 3 targets, 3 catches, and 2 touchdowns against the Packers. I know Cody was a huge fan of Adam Troutman coming into this year. Troutman did play, but James was the guy that, caught the 2 big touchdowns. So he is worth monitoring if you are in need of a tight end. But I'm going to go ahead and just, while I'm talking, roll on to my first guy, and I'm going to go with Rondale Moore. So I know we talked about Christian Kirk in that article. He did have the 2 big touchdowns. He did have the biggest day. And yes, he even played a lot more snaps than Rondale Moore. But Moore is electric. And it looked like the Cardinals just wanted to use him. He was on special teams. He was playing running back. He was playing receiver. He was getting tons of targets. He had a decent day, put up I think it was about 8.8 points, which is not bad for first game as a rookie. But the Cardinals did commit about 1,000 penalties on offense, and he actually had quite a few really big plays that were called back by penalty. So if those penalties never would have happened, Rondale Moore could have had a monster day and would have been more on the radar. Now, I think Moore, with his speed, with his athleticism, is going to pop up on the radar very soon within the next couple of weeks. So you might want to go out there and stash him before he becomes too big and before other people look at him too much. Let Christian Kirk be that smoke screen so nobody's looking at Rondale Moore, because I think he's going to be a big one this year, guys.
Yeah, he was definitely an interesting rookie that we were talking about all offseason. Dynasty drafts, we were, I think, higher on him than a few other people. We liked his gadgetness of that he can play with, how they'll use him out there in Arizona. So definitely like that one. I did want to follow up on my Adam Troutman love. Yes, Juwan Johnson did get the 2 touchdowns, but Adam Troutman did lead the team in targets with 6 targets, 3 catches. The Saints didn't have to throw the ball a lot. I mean, Winston threw 5 touchdowns and had under 200 yards. That's incredible. Under 150 yards. He had 148 yards with 5 touchdowns. Has that ever been done? I don't know. But we're not talking about that game. We're talking about waivers. But I will talk about the Saints, and that is running back Tony Jones Jr. Now, last week, if you listen to the podcast, first of all, thank you. But second of all, I said, you don't need Tony Jones. If he's on the waivers, let him be on the waivers. They use Tony Jones quite a bit. Now, this team did run the ball 39 times. So that's a lot. But Tony Jones did still see 11 carries. He was lined up in the backfield quite a bit. He spelled Alvin Kamara. He averaged more yards than Alvin Kamara did. Alvin Kamara is going to be a big part of the passing game, so they're going to save him for that, and they're going to incorporate Tony Jones. And he is also a great handcuff that has some flexible value if you're in a super pinch, especially as more injuries pile on. So Tony Jones is only owned in 3.4% of leagues right now. I know I said last week, guys, you don't need to pick him up. I'm apologizing now if you won and you're not going to get Tony Jones and you really wanted to get him. I apologize. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we have bad days. Sometimes we have bad games. But this week, I'm telling you to go out and get Tony Jones Jr.
That's a good one. And yeah, I mean, we didn't expect him to be that good, but hey, it happens. I'm going to move over to Indianapolis and look at that backfield. We were very interested in how that split was going to go, and we ended up not seeing any Marlon Mack, which it's pretty noteworthy. So it was Jonathan Taylor leading the way like we expected, and Nyheim Hines actually saw 9 carries, which I mean, he does carry the ball, but you normally see him in the passing game. So 9 carries to go along with 6 receptions as well, which was the second leading receiver on the Colts. If he's going to keep putting that up every week, that's a committee that could have 2 running backs that are startable. You could flex Nyheim Hines if he keeps getting that kind of workload. So as long as it's not they're easing in Marlon Mack and Marlon Mack's going to itch away at that 9 carries, you can start Nyheim Hines. He's somebody that you should at least add to your bench and have there as that insurance policy. And he's only owned in 26% of leagues right now.
Absolutely, George. And you know what? The way the NFL is going, I think you're going to see a lot more of these teams that have the 2 startable running backs rather than the one big guy and then another guy that spells in there a little bit. The committee approach is just a thing. I don't love it. Nobody here loves it for fantasy purposes, but it makes sense for NFL purposes. We're going to see a lot more of it. So, Cody talked about Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon. You got the Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb. You got the Zeke and Tony Pollard. And now you got Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor. Like, it's becoming more and more of a thing to have 2 startable running backs on a team. But I'm going to move off of running backs. Running back and receiver is usually the position that breaks out in week 1. It's usually the guys you want to look at the most. However, sometimes that's not where your area of weakness is. So I'm going to look at a quarterback other than Jameis Winston, a quarterback that is only 2.8% owned and that I went to bat for hard this offseason because of the battle of me saying I don't think Matt Stafford is that much better than this guy, and that is Jared Goff. Now, I get it. Jared Goff hasn't always been the flashiest name. He's had some good fantasy seasons. A few years ago, he was a fantasy stud, and people were starting him. And then the last couple of years, he's been kind of meh. However, he was on the Rams, a team with a really good defense, a really good run game. Yes, they had the receivers, but they didn't always have to rely on Jared Goff's arm. Now, in week 1, we were shown that they have DeAndre Swift, who's good at catching the ball. They have a really bad defense on that team that gave up a lot of points, so they're playing from behind and had to start throwing the ball out. The Lions are one of the worst teams in the league this year. We expect them to be. They had a great comeback against the 49ers, almost miraculous comeback, but they're going to be playing from behind a lot this year. When you're playing from behind, you're going to have to throw the ball a lot. Jared Goff is going to get a lot of garbage points, if nothing else. The dude put up 28 points in week 1. I expect him to put up similar points a lot of these weeks because of him playing from behind and throwing a lot. So, guys, don't be afraid to go out and get Jared Goff, even if you just want to stash him as your backup for right now. He's a guy worth looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Jared Goff, but like you said, the team is expected to be down a decent amount, and he's currently only rostered in 2.8% of leagues. So, maybe some matchups, you would have thought the 49ers matchup based on their defense would have been a rough one, but the 49ers are definitely the weakest on their defense in the secondary. So they're going to be down a lot. Maybe not a bad start against Green Bay. We just watched Jameis Winston do it. I mean, I'm not running out to get Jared Goff. There's some other guys that I would. But if I'm debating Tyrod Taylor or Jared Goff, maybe I'll go with the chance that they have to throw for 300 yards to get back into the game over Tyrod Taylor, who might only get 250 yards. So just something to think about. But that is another great one there, Snyder. I'm going to go back to the running backs. This guy, he's owned in 69% of leagues, so he's probably not even available.
Nice.
So you're probably like, why are you even bringing him up? But it's a running back by committee that we had really no answers on going into the season. There was a lot of Devin Singletary fans, and there was a lot of Zach Moss stands. Well, Zach Moss was a healthy scratch. I don't know what that was about, but he was a healthy scratch. Again, Devin Singletary did not have the best performance. He only had 11 carries. It wasn't for a lot of yards. But again, I talked about with Najee Harris, they was playing the Bills. Well, the Bills are playing the Steelers, and the Steelers probably have a better run defense than the Bills do. So take it with a grain of salt. Don't expect a huge outpouring of rushing attempts from Devin Singletary. That's not the Bills' offense. They are still a pass first. They're only going to use the run to keep defenses honest. But Devin Singletary, not single. I don't know why I keep wanting to call him single. Maybe because he's the single running back that you should own in that team. But Devin Singletary, again, 69% owned. But if you can get him, go out there and get him. It's a starting running back. It's not a guy you're going to feel great about playing if you have to. But if you had Raheem Mostert and you went tight ends are wide receiver heavy and you still need a running back and you don't get Elijah Mitchell, but Devin Singletary's out there, hey, that's a great ad for you.
Definitely. I mean, and if Zach Moss is going to be a healthy scratch, I feel so much more comfortable playing Devin Singletary. I was absolutely in shock to hear that he wasn't even active. But that's going to change things in that backfield if that's the case. So we did tease earlier in the show the Broncos wide receiver situation. I'm going to start us off here with Tim Patrick, who is only 0.3% owned. If you remember, Tim Patrick had some decent fantasy weeks by the end of last season, and now he's probably up to that 2/3 in the pecking order. And he's that short yardage, safe hands kind of guy. He can break a couple of big plays, but it's going to be him and Noah Fant who are going to be the reliable, more short yardage targets for Teddy Bridgewater. And for a guy who likes to manage a game and not turn the ball over, I think that's something that's going to be an asset for him. So I look for a big boost out of Tim Patrick now, seeing that Jerry Judy is going to miss a significant amount of time.
Absolutely, George. You know what? Why don't you just go ahead and jump into your next guy? I mean, it's on the same track.
Okay. All right. And then the other guy who's going to slash into that 2/3 is KJ Hamler, but KJ Hamler is the big play guy. So I mentioned Tim Patrick first because it's Teddy Bridgewater starting at quarterback. If it was Drew Lock starting at quarterback, I would mention KJ Hamler first because I feel like the guy who wants to gunsling is going to target KJ Hamler more. The guy who wants to manage a game is going to target Tim Patrick. But if he's the only guy who's out there to stretch the field at this point, KJ Hamler is also worth an ad because Bridgewater did take some shots. They were at KJ Hamler. He dropped a touchdown that would have made him have a huge day last week, and he's going to see more of those opportunities now. So really, both of them are worth ads. Both of them might be startable any given week. You just have to hope for Hamler to get the long touchdown, while Patrick is going to get you more of those 5-6 catch games. It's going to help you more in a PPR.
Absolutely, George. It's definitely something worth monitoring. I mean, I know I've been a big fan of Tim Patrick last year. You and I both were. We were looking at him last year, and I'm surprised to see he's only 0.3% owned after the year he had. But, I guess Tim Patrick is not a flashy name, so people aren't really looking at him.
He's
So I'll
got
go
2
ahead and
first
move on.
names, so
Yeah, it's always sketchy. I'll go ahead and move on to my next one. It's not a guy, it's a group of guys because I am going to give you guys a defense to look at. If your defense didn't perform well or if you're just a streamer, here's a team that you might be able to look at, and that is, I hate to say it, the Cardinals defense. They slaughtered my Titans. It was embarrassing to watch. I mean, a team with Derrick Henry, Julio Jones, and A.J. Brown could not muster anything on offense, and it's because Chandler Jones had 5 sacks. He was all over the field. I don't like the guy, but they also have J.J. Watt. He's always all over the field, and they have, in my opinion, the number 1 safety in the NFL in Budda Baker. Guys, this is a defense that you can look at that should be able to slot in. I mean, give me 1 second here. I will tell you what their defensive stats were for the day. I know they put up 18 points against the Titans. They also had 6 sacks, an interception, 2 forced fumbles, and both fumbles were recovered. So no defensive touchdowns, still put up 18 points, held a good offense at bay. They're dynamic. They're fast. They can fly around. They're playmakers. They're going to give up points here and there to some good teams. It's going to happen. But honestly, I was super impressed with them. They're only 33% owned, so it's a defense you should be able to go out there and get in most leagues. But, we've seen this with teams like the Chiefs in the past who did give up plenty of points in the game, but they made so many plays that the points evened out. Like the 49ers this week had a defensive touchdown. They had some turnovers. They had some sacks. Yes, they gave up a ton of points to the Lions, but they were still startable because they got so many stats. And that's what the Cardinals defense is starting to look like to me. So they're a team you should be able to slot in there most weeks. I mean, play it smart with the matchups, but if you're looking to stream some defenses, here's a good one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I definitely like the Cardinals pick there. I think Isaiah Simmons, he looked really good in year 2. Top, I don't know, was he top 10 or was he pick 11? I can't remember from 2 drafts ago, but a guy, generational linebacker prospect. He looked really good. He shined. And they have Minnesota next week, who just lost to the Bengals, and then Jacksonville in week 3. So definitely a very good defense to pick up. And I'm actually going to pivot because defenses can win fantasy championships. They can win real championships, but they can win fantasy championships as well. And I'm going to go with the Cleveland Browns defense because surprisingly, this defense that is so good on paper is only rostered in 28% of leagues. And that's because they played the Kansas City Chiefs week 1. But they have the Houston Texans this week, followed by the Chicago Bears, and then the Minnesota Vikings. If you are in one of those 75% of leagues that they're available in, you can pick up a top 10 defense for sure and start them for the next 3 weeks. Then they have some rough stretch with the Chargers and Cardinals weeks 4 and 5, weeks 4 and 5. So you might have to pivot after that. But 28% for Myles Garrett, Jadeveon Clowney, those guys up front against the Houston
Denzel
Texans. I know they
Ward.
look good, but there's a lot of talent on the Cleveland Browns defense.
So
Very
many.
promising schedule. Go out and get them because a lot of times defense are an afterthought. I know we talk about in the draft, you wait till the last round, and this is why. A team like the Browns didn't get drafted because they're playing the Chiefs week 1 and nobody wanted them. But now you can go grab them on the waivers, and they have 3+ matchups in a row.
I'll go ahead and pick up your guy that you pivoted from because I think he's worth mentioning as well. You were going to talk about Kenny Gainwell for the Philadelphia Eagles. He seems to be another one of those committees that is possible to have 2 starters, but I think you should pump the brakes on Gainwell and see if he has a couple more weeks. But Miles Sanders looks solid, and Gainwell ended up getting a touchdown and still scoring, I believe it was like 10 to 12 fantasy points. And the Philly legend
12.3.
Boston Scott, yeah, there you go, 12.3. And Boston Scott didn't even see the field. So if it's just going to be 2 and it's just going to be Sanders and Gainwell, it could be another one of those committees that you could start 2 plays from. So Adam, don't start him for the few weeks and see if it keeps up, but definitely worth rostering. And he's only owned in 10.4% of leagues.
And I think it's worth mentioning that the Eagles have had some number 1 running backs in guys like Jay Ajayi, Miles Sanders, Jordan Howard, and yet we always talk about their number 2 in LeGarrette Blount, Corey Clement, Boston Scott. For some reason, their number 2 is always valuable in some way. So I don't think that this is going to be any different. I think that Kenny Gainwell definitely will have. It's going to be those kinds of things where you have to play the matchups. You kind of got to. It's going to be a riskier play, but definitely a good speculative ad, George. But guys, I think that wraps up all of our waivers for this week. So it's time to move on to overreaction time, which is my favorite time because I do it all the time. I see the Titans give up 1 touchdown. I'm like, great, we're not winning a game this year. I'm known for overreacting. I lost in 8 of my 9 fantasy leagues, so I'm pretty sure I'm not winning a championship this year at all. Overreaction. But it's time to get into some of the players that we might be overreacting on. The lightning round, a panic button. Do you want to hit the panic button, or are we still okay with these guys? George, I'll let you start it off with the first guy.
All right, I'm tasked with Ezekiel Elliott, who scored 4.9 points in game 1 on Thursday night. I am not going to push the panic button on Ezekiel Elliott yet. They played the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers have one of the best defenses in the league. Ezekiel Elliott still got Dak there. Dak did not get hurt or anything in week 1. It's going to take some time for their offense to get rolling again. They actually still put up a lot of points. Zeke's going to get his chances, especially when the Cowboys offense puts up enough points to actually play with a lead, as opposed to playing from behind most of the time against Tampa Bay. He'll be fine. Don't push the panic button.
Yeah, I agree with you, George. Don't press the panic button on Zeke. I actually brought it up last week. I said, are we willing to move Zeke off the line because of the Zach Martin COVID and then how good the Buccaneers defense is? But they don't play a playoff team from last year again until November 21st. So Tyler's on the podcast. He owns Zeke in our league of record. But, maybe go make some trades for Zeke. Maybe that guy is going to hit the panic button and you could get a top running back on the cheaper end. So definitely go out there. Of course, that means they left me with my guy, Aaron Rodgers. He only had 1.32 points. I saw a stat on PFF that he had a passer rating lower than if he just threw the ball into the ground every time. I didn't even know that's possible. Like, he had a rough day. The whole Packers had a rough day. I think they forgot the memo that, hey, there's only 3 preseason games now. They thought that was the 4th one. Maybe I don't know. But don't hit the panic button quite yet on Aaron Rodgers. He was drafted a little bit lower, even though he was an MVP last year, but he was an MVP last year. The offense will get clicking around. This is still a very talented team. And don't think just because I'm a Packers fan, I'm like, don't hit the panic button on Aaron Rodgers. No, you drafted him. I'm sorry that you probably lost your league if you started him, but they have the Lions this week, like at home opener, bounce back. Matt LaFleur has never lost 2 games in a row in the same season. Aaron, the last time they've lost, they always followed up with a 10-plus point victory. So if those trends continue, it's going to be a big week for the Aaron Rodgers and the rest of the Packers offense. So definitely not hitting the panic button on him just yet.
RELAX on Aaron Rodgers. Going on, I'm going to move on to wide receiver Calvin Ridley for the Falcons. Look, it's week 1. I think there's a lot going on with preseasons being kind of iffy. A lot of people don't play in the preseason. A lot of guys don't have time to get that chemistry. Now, I know Calvin Ridley was on the team last year with Matt Ryan, but still, you have a whole offseason off. So Calvin Ridley put up 7.6 points. You're expecting more, but really the whole Falcons offense just wasn't clicking. I think that's going to change. I would not hit the panic button on Calvin Ridley. He's the number 1 receiver there with Julio Jones out. We saw what he could do last year. Yes, he's going to be inconsistent at times, but you probably already knew that when you drafted him. So he's going to be all right. Don't hit the panic button. Calvin Ridley's fine.
Can I just give you
He
a few
also
quick
played a
stats
team. Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go for it.
about Calvin Ridley? Through the first 8 plays, he was 3 for 3 for 39 yards. He was balling out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what happened because the rest of the 61 Atlanta plays, he was 2 for 5 for 12 reception yards. Like, what are they? I mean, he still got 8 targets on the day, but still, like, what happened?
So they're playing against an Eagles secondary that now has Darius Slay and Steven Nelson, and they played a completely different system than people expected. And they basically just let the corners turn and look at the quarterback and just eat up on Ridley. Every time Ridley had any kind of opening, the corners just shut down on him and knocked the ball away before he could even get to him. So it was a case of there was no tape on the Eagles defense, and the Falcons did a horrible job of adjusting to it, is what I think. So yeah, I agree. He's going to be fine. It was just a week 1 fluke. I got Julio Jones now, who had 4.4 half-point PPR points in week 1, and a little bit of a temper, if I'm not mistaken, as he got a little angry near the end of the game and may have punched somebody. But this is tough. I'm going to say do not push the panic button, but my hand's on it ready to push it if something else happens, I think. We were worried about AJ Brown losing receptions, losing points because of Julio Jones coming in, and now it looks like AJ Brown's going to hold that number 1 receiver like he should, but if Julio does not step it up, he's going to be more of eyes for a defense than he is going to be a major fantasy asset, in my opinion. They tried to target him in the red zone, though, which is big because Julio doesn't catch touchdowns. If Julio can start catching touchdowns, he's going to be completely fine. So don't push the panic button, but I'm ready to in a week or 2 if this keeps up.
I think it's worth noting, yes, Julio did punch somebody on a big play that brought back the yards. He did have 3 drops in the game, didn't even get targeted until midway through the second quarter. He was really just non-existent this game. However, it is worth noting that Titans did say before the game that Julio Jones and Ryan Tannehill have no chemistry yet. Julio did get hurt early on in camp, and by the time he came back and was healthy, Tannehill got COVID and was out for the second half of camp. So Tannehill and Julio did not have any time to practice together all through camp, all through preseason, and they said themselves they're going to have to work on it. There's plenty of videos of Tannehill and Julio talking in practice, really trying to work out the fine details. I think they'll get there. He just might not be where you want him to be early on in the season. You might have to go 2-3 weeks with Julio being almost non-existent, but I think eventually Julio will be the Julio we remember.
I think that's a great point. It's also worth noting that last year, the Titans led the league in play action passes. That's where Ryan Tannehill thrived. Obviously, they had Derrick Henry. They had the lowest or not the lowest, but I think it was 30 or 31st play action rate week 1. They have a new offensive coordinator. Their passing game is looking apparently going to be a lot different than it was under Arthur Smith. Maybe it's just the week 1 jitters. Maybe it was because they were down early. Again, it might not be the time to hit the panic button, but you're probably getting close, a little bit worried. Hopefully, you weren't drafting him when he first got traded, and he was still going in the second and third round, and you got him when he was in the 5th, maybe the 6th round. So don't panic just yet. Like they all said, maybe look to not start him next week. If you went receiver heavy, maybe you want to give him a week, take him out of your lineup. That obviously depends on who you have. But that Titans offense, they have some things to figure out.
Cody,
Am
go
I up?
ahead and finish up the
Yeah.
trifecta of receivers I started that are on the panic button segment.
Gotcha. I got lost. I was so into the Julio Jones and the Calvin Ridley, I forgot whose turn it was, but it's mine. And this guy is Brandon Ayuk. We've talked about him. George actually texted us Tyler Lockett or Brandon Ayuk, and I didn't know who to pick, so I sent him a video of me spinning one of those wheels on Google, and it landed on Brandon Ayuk, and he went with it because that's what the wheel said. It's probably not how you should pick your starting lineup. You should probably do it more analytically. But it was week 1. We didn't have much to go on. Ayuk had 0 points. We talked about him with quotes of the week. He has some growing up to do. I mean, it's week 1. You don't want to hit the panic button on anybody after 1 week. So I'm not going to hit the panic button, but my hand is right over the panic button, ready to hit it. It's like that 15-second tension in Deal or No Deal. Like, am I going to take it or I'm going to shut the box? We're going to commercial break. We'll have to come back next week to find out.
Okay, I think that's all that needs to be said. Go ahead with Saquon Barkley, Tyler.
Hey, Saquon's your guy, I think. Oh no, he's my guy. Look at that.
There you go.
Wow, this is confusing, guys.
This is
We are-
coming
we
off the
getting all
rails,
kinds of-
guys.
We're still thrown off. Wow. I started Saquon Barkley in a league, so obviously I'm a little worried. I started Zeke and Saquon, and they're both on here, so it was in our league of record. I'm a little sketched out, but at the same time, I don't think you should panic about Saquon Barkley yet. It is still Saquon's Barkley. We know what he can do. I liked seeing the passing game actually open up a little bit for the Giants. The Giants didn't perform well. If you saw the memes on Facebook, their offensive line was blocking themselves. It's a little sad. The Giants definitely need to figure some things out. The offensive line needs to get it together. But the passing game did open up a little bit. We saw some Darius Slayton making a big catch. We saw Kenny Galladay finally get used by the end of the game. Big game for Sterling Shepard, another guy you should be targeting on waivers. Sterling Shepard had a big game, looked great. So if that passing game continues to open up like that, what's going to happen is teams are going to have to start playing for the pass more. And Saquon Barkley is going to suddenly find some running room. Despite that bad offensive line, he's the guy that is talented enough to still find running room. You might have to play the matchups a little early in the season. But then again, if you drafted a guy like Saquon in the first or even second round, if you're lucky, you're not benching him. Still roll with Saquon. Do not push the panic button yet.
I can definitely agree. Like, we're worried about him easing in back from the injury, too. So you expected a slow start. That might have been a little slower than you expected, but at least he looked healthy. And you're right. Just roll with it. He'll get there. Thank you to Cody for color coding the rest of this segment so we don't get lost again. That means I'm up here with Mike Evans, who got 3.9 points back on Thursday night. And I'm not hitting the panic button because there was rumors out there that he was actually injured during the game. He did not look great. He was on and off the field, so it's probably true. And you're not going to see Godwin and Gronk go for 20 points every week. You're going to see Mike Evans jump in there. Antonio Brown, too, actually, I think went for 20 points. That's even if that evens out and everyone gets 15 points, it's still solid out of Mike Evans, who you probably drafted as your wide receiver 2 or a late wide receiver 1. And he's going to get those 20-point weeks too. He'll be fine. Just we got to watch on the injury report for him this week. And I think it's because that wasn't a big out there, oh my God, he was injured during the game is why everyone's freaking out. But he'll be fine.
Yeah, Mike Evans, not too worried about it. That's just a tough wide receiver core. When I say they're like the Bengals, I'm talking about the guys we want to actually start. They're like the Steelers. There's 3 guys. They're going to rotate who it is. But Mike Evans has yet to have less than 1,000 yards receiving in his career. So he'll bounce back. He'll be fine. I'm going to stick with the Bucs, though. Go with running back Ronald Jones. And this guy I'm going to hit the panic button on. I mean, wasn't a high draft pick. I get it. I wasn't a huge fan of him drafting this year. I was team Leonard Fournette. I understand why people were team Ronald Jones. The dude fumbled and he got pulled immediately. Didn't get a second chance. Bruce Arians is very much like, you mess up, you're done. I mean, Leonard Fournette dropped a pass that went for a pick. He still got to play. Leonard Fournette is the guy. I think we'll start to see more Gio Bernard sprinkled in. Ronald Jones, like, please try to trade him. I mean, you're probably not going to get a lot of value out of him. I mean, that's a guy you drafted him high enough, you don't want to cut him after week 1. But sometimes it's better to cut your losses a week too early than a week too late. Ronald Jones hitting the panic button on trying to move him if I can this week.
And Cody and I had a little bit of a discussion on Thursday Night Football, and I'd love to hear the fans on this one. So if you watch Thursday Night Football, you probably saw both these plays. Ronald Jones fumbled, giving it to the Cowboys, and Leonard Fournette was throwing a screen pass, hit him square in the hands, popped up, and was picked off by the Cowboys. Both running backs did something that caused a turnover. But if you are a head coach of a team, now we know how Bruce Arians is feeling because he still put Fournette back in, but he didn't put Ronald Jones back in. But if you're an NFL team, which play bothers you more? Your running back fumbling or your running back missing a pass that hit you in the hands, causing a pick? I'm just curious what the fans think. Really doesn't mean much, but curious of some opinions. So feel free to shout out to us. Let us know which one you think is worse. Maybe we'll even post it on our social media. We'll see. But I'm going to go with my last guy. When we originally wrote this up, we had 8 people. So this guy wasn't even on the list. I added him because, hey, it's not fair. I want 3 people too. And I put my own boy, Derrick Henry, on here. Now, it sounds a little weird having him on here because he did get 9.8 points, a lot of garbage time points there, but he struggled all game through. And with me being such a big Derrick Henry fan, I had everybody that drafted him reaching out to me like it's my fault that he didn't run well. Guys, I don't control the guy. I'm not his offensive line. I can't block for him. I might have blocked better than his offensive line did. I mean, that might be saying a lot, but honestly, it was pretty bad. But do not hit the panic button on Derrick Henry. Do not go trading him cheap because he had a bad week 1. You think this is what it's going to be like. He starts slow every single year. Every year. He led the league in rushing the last 2 years in a row, and both of the last 2 years he did nothing in week 1. It's very common for him to start off slow. He hits it big late. You're going to want those 200-yard games in the fantasy playoffs. You're not going to want to be playing against that. So hold on to him for later in the year. Still start him every week unless you have someone amazing on your bench. But guys, don't hit the panic button. It's early. He starts slow. It's typical. Derrick Henry's the GOAT.
Yeah, I think you could take that a step further with Derrick Henry. It is week 1. A lot of things happen in week 1. Look back last year. The Jaguars won week 1. They didn't win again. Week 1 is often not how the rest of the season is going to go. So take a deep breath. It's a long season. But guys, before we go, we do have to preview week 2 because we're doing 2 shows a week now. So we're not going to be back until after the Thursday night game. So we got to preview week 2. It's in 4 days. It's the New York Football Giants at the Washington Football Team. And we have mascot number 2, Lucy, is now appeared on the screen. She is an avid football fan of the Indianapolis Colts, I've been told. But we're talking about the Giants and the football team. Big thing to watch here.
Guys.
Cat friendly, dog friendly, hamster friendly, whatever pet. Just tweet us a picture of your pets. We'd love to see it. Our girlfriends would love it even more. But, into the actual matchup, we talked about Taylor Heineke starting.
Hey, you almost did it again.
I almost did it. I let it slip. Maybe I'll cut it out, but no, I'll keep it in there. The AC joint with Antonio Gibson, but he's supposed to play using injection pain management, so he should still play. The Giants' offensive line, I think we all need to say a prayer for Daniel Jones because Von Miller ate them alive. That was one dude. The football team has 4 dudes or more. This game could get ugly quick. I don't know if the football team can put up the points to take the Giants out of the game. But yeah, start the defense if you got them. And then my last note, and before I let the guys preview it, is always remember, if you have a person on Thursday Night Football, take them out of your flex spot, put them into one of your running backs or wide receiver spots. Don't get caught with a person in your flex that plays on Thursday Night Football.
Great piece of advice there. I think the person that I want to highlight from this game would have to be Logan Thomas. I think Logan Thomas is primed for a big game in week 2 against a not super great Giants defense. We're always looking for a tight end to put up some points. He put up 10.2 in week 1, if I'm remembering correctly. Can now come back and have a great week 2 as well. Still not someone you should play every single week. Don't take that the wrong way. But week 2, another great time to play him.
Yeah, if I got to highlight somebody from this game, it's going to be someone I just highlighted, and that's Sterling Shepard. I am really impressed with what I saw. He had the best season of his career last year, and it looks like he's just going to capitalize on that now. I know Kenny Golladay was the name that everybody was looking at coming into these drafts, but Sterling Shepard looks like the guy that's actually emerging as the top target, especially in a game like this. You need to remember that Daniel Jones is most likely going to be playing from behind because he's going to be getting demolished by that Washington front. And with them playing from behind, that means he's probably going to have to air the ball out. And on top of that, there's probably going to be some quick pressures in there. And Sterling Shepard can play a lot from the slot. He can play a lot of those short routes, really good at those little gadget routes. So those quick dump off passes is going to be great to Sterling Shepard. He's going to want to catch those, and he's the kind of guy that can definitely do something with it. He catches a short little pass, he can take it upfield real quick, make some guys miss. So Sterling Shepard's a guy to watch in this game, and I really like him. I'm honestly willing to start him as your wide receiver 2 or flex this week, depending on who you have.
Yeah, Sterling Shepard's a great ad. Great point. He had 9 targets against Denver. Just mentioned, I almost forgot who they were playing, but 9 targets against Denver. Apparently has a connection with Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones wasn't a bad option. I mean, I didn't play him last week. I played Ryan Fitzpatrick in one league, but that league is weird scoring. But Daniel Jones had like 20 points that week. So again, Daniel Jones, hey, he has some running ability. Last time we played on Thursday night, we saw that almost 70-yard touchdown. Almost. A little stumble. But I like the Sterling Shepard ad a lot there. That's some great points. Evan Ingram.
Stop you there, Cody, before you go into Evan Ingram. I just want to say a little fun fact from this week. I was watching the Giants game at one point this week, and Daniel Jones started running, and all I could think of was that Thursday Night Football trip. And I literally yelled at the TV, "Don't fall, Daniel!" And as soon as I said that, he got hit, fell, and fumbled the ball and turned it over. And I was like, oh God, I totally jinxed it. I yelled at him, and he fumbled, he got scared. It was just super funny to me because Daniel Jones.
So you're like the guy
from
the Buffalo Wild Wings commercials.
Yeah, pretty much. I put up the little sprinkler system and caused him to trip.
You're not going to believe me, but I actually did the same thing on the same play.
Oh, jeez.
Did you say Danny or Daniel? Was it the exact same verbiage?
I don't remember that exact detail.
This guy. No, and all I was going to say about Evan Ingram was he might be back this week, but I would expect them to hold him out and get the 10-day rest into week 3. So another reason why Sterling Shepard over the middle, reliable option would be a good start. And even if he is technically your flex player, he can be your wide receiver 2, and you can put your wide receiver in the flex because he plays Thursday night. But guys, it's fun. We're doing 2 shows a week now as we try to get through this NFL season. Tyler, we're glad to have you back. Hopefully next week your fantasy season week goes a little bit better. But for you guys listening, thank you as always. It was a fun one.
Absolutely, Cody. I'm glad to be here. My schedule has been pretty crazy. I have some personal stuff I'm dealing with at home, so I appreciate all the fans that are, patient with me as I come here and there with the podcast. I'm going to try to be here as much as possible, though. But honestly, guys, I proposed a question that I was curious of some opinions. There's some guys out there that you might be wondering, should I pick up this guy or should I pick up this guy? There's definitely going to be some more lineup advice you're going to need. And the biggest thing is reach out to us. And honestly, it doesn't have to be asking questions. Let us know what your opinions are. Do you think George is an idiot and everything he said was completely false? That's great. So does me and Cody. So reach out to us. Let us know. Say that. Talk some trash on George. Long story short, this podcast is so much more fun for us and more fun for you when you get involved.
And like Cody said, we're going to a 2 podcast a week format, so just more content for you all. Also, make sure to check out the couchgms.com. I posted our waiver wire article earlier this week. We're going to have even more coming to you from the website that's going to help you dominate your fantasy leagues. So, with no further ado, we're going to wrap this one up. For our Tyler Snyder and Cody Roadcap, I'm George Kerth, and we'll see you later in the week for our full week preview.
Whoa.